have Mark Patrick, who is lead architect of BBC, and Dan Ashcroft, senior project manager at BBC. And they're going to be talking about a review of the IP live core implementation in BBC Cymru, Wales, Cardiff, Central Square. So take it away, Mark and Dan.
Hi there, can everyone hear me okay? Just someone, Dan, not something if you can hear me. Right, let's get underway then. And don't adjust your sets. I'm not jaundiced, I've got an orange blind, and so my coloration is completely wrong working from home. It's one of the perils of home working. So, let's just get underway with what we're talking about here. Well, those of you who've been keeping an eye on what we've been doing in the industry over the last few years will know that we've been building a new centre in Cardiff Central Square for the headquarters of BBC Cymru Wales, which is the Welsh part of the BBC. Well, it's now live through the last part of 2020, despite the COVID and the lockdowns imposed on us and the very strange ways of working that enforced. We've gone live, radio went live first, followed by live TV. It's even been used for production of coverage of local elections, which are quite large elections within Wales the last couple of months. So it's done, it's in use 24/7. We've met our timetables and we've really pushed the innovation on this project far higher than I've seen on previous BBC projects. This has really been a hotbed of innovation built around 2110 and numerous other innovations. And we've embedded information security through our design. So we knew from the outset that was going to be a key part. That's something we'll talk about today. So Dan, over to you.
Yeah, so for people who aren't aware, BBC Cymru Wales is a microcosm of the BBC. So each nation in the United Kingdom, so Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and England. Obviously, England is the main network base for network TV, but BBC Wales has its own TV channels. It also has some co-productions with a Welsh-speaking channel, which is called S4C. It's got its own radio, both native Welsh speaking and in English. Lots of online. It's got a national orchestra, lots of production facilities. It supports network and local programming, and it's got the largest BBC newsroom outside of West One in London, and also it does quite a lot of drama productions. Quite a lot of the high value drama productions the BBC does are actually down at Rothlock, which is the BBC's largest drama studio site, and things like Doctor Who, Holby City and Sherlock are the big things, and obviously with it being Wales, rugby union particularly big thing. The site itself, right in the centre of Cardiff, you can't miss it. People who went to Cardiff 4 or 5 years ago were met with a bus station. Now they're met with BBC Wales, and yeah, it's very close to the Principality Stadium. It's actually, for anyone who's been to Cardiff, it's between the train station and the Principality Station. Some of the pictures you see there, I mean, obviously the exterior of the building. The picture on the bottom left is the main general presentation studio, and similarly, yeah, the one in the middle is too, and all the office space, open plan, new ways of working, and obviously now that we've been living through a pandemic, how people flexibly use the building is obviously being looked at. Some facts and figures. So a lot of tech and a lot of new facilities for BBC Wales. The building size is a large site, but it's considerably, I think it's about a third, maybe even a quarter of the size of what was the existing building. There's large GP studio, a lot of flexible production areas. We've got VR, AR, a number of edit suites, and we've got some multi-purpose suites for audio and TV, master control area, lots of radio production studios and self-op studios. And then we've got an operational support area which supports all these operations, which encompasses master control and also sort of quality control as well. So why did we go IP in the first place? Well, when we were specifying this, and I had to actually look back at onto some of the tender documentations. Believe it or not, I think we signed the contract with Grass Valley back in 2017. So that was before Cymru 2110, and it was April 2017. So it wasn't even late in the day. It was before 2110 had been ratified. When we first started talking about this project, which has been percolating in the BBC for 10 years and longer than I've actually worked for the BBC, it was first of all going to be one of the last HD SDI sites. It then became a HD SDI site mainly with some IP around the edges. By the time we actually got around to going out for tender, it's going to be mainly IP with SDI around the edges, because we didn't want to leave BBC Wales with a building that was left on what we saw at that point as possibly going to be legacy hardware, although it's not quite legacy hardware, and I don't think that will be the case for quite some time. Flexibility, we wanted to support new ways of working, a lot more cross-pollination of radio and TV, and also online offering. And eventually it'll be the lowest cost model due to the adoption of commercial off-the-shelf hardware. It's still quite a high shelf, I would say, although comparatively speaking, a lot of the tender evaluations we did, we didn't end up spending that much more on a future-proof building. Some of the top risks, like I say, when we signed the contract with Grass Valley, they actually signed up to a standard that wasn't actually ratified at that point. So a lot of the things that we encountered were done for the first time. We were at the bleeding edge. Interoperability, NMOS. I think at the point we decided we were going to go for this with all the risks that were there. I think it was only ISO 2 and ISO 3. Am I right in saying that, Mark? Were actually
very early days
had been developed, but they weren't adopted widely in the market at that point. There's an obvious cybersecurity risk with going to IP and new skills. We did a lot of work on training traditional broadcast engineers in more network engineering. It's fair to say there were a lot more resources required to support the delivery than would have been if we'd have gone with a traditional SDI router. Indeed, the method of procurement, we actually procured the live IP core outside of a systems integration contract, where normally the main router would be a big part of that systems integration contract. And we did that so that we could push the level of innovation that we wanted to achieve. Refresh cycles, yep, the IT industry, I'm pretty sure the switches or the leaf switches were end of life by the time we went live, because it's Cisco, and I think that's true of all network vendors. So yeah, don't align well with traditional broadcaster capital plans. I talked about the BBC probably percolating Central Square for a good 10 years. Obviously, with bits of it going end of life, it remains to be seen how long those bits of infrastructure last for.
Okay, thanks, Dan. So we'll just give you some of the headlines here. Yeah, back in 2017, I think it was, as Dan said, we awarded the main contract for the live core to Grass Valley. That was for separate media and control networks using Cisco Fabric that we bought through Grass Valley as a turnkey provider. Our main control is via BNCS. You may or may not be familiar with BNCS, but it's a control system widely used throughout the BBC. And we've got a little bit of NMOS in there, but not as much as we had aspired to. We'll come on to that in later on in the slides. We've got orchestration via GV Convergent, which is also the software-defined network SDN control, and that's controlling Cisco DCNM. So we've got a sort of stack of control which stitches everything together, but the end users don't see that. The end users make routes using BNCS, and it looks like it always has done to all intents and purposes, although it opens up a whole load of new ways of working, like flexible assignment of facilities. Video and audio we carry in 2110, and the audio for that we're using Profile C with 125 microsecond timing and 16 channels. So we're quite aligned to what people are used to in terms of audio as a resource within SDI. We've used 2022-7 for resilience over a pair of media networks, and we've got quite a lot of gateways connecting in baseband SDI, and that's a mixture of GV nodes and GV IQ UCP cards. When we first went with GV, it was only the nodes available to us. In fact, the UCP range was from a competitor, from SAM. The merger between SAM and GV worked in our favor, so opened up a bigger opportunity for different cards for different solutions. Multi-viewers, absolute win-win of moving to IP. The multi-viewers just work so well within the IP environment. You can assign anything anywhere, and they're built with KMX cards. Quick look at our topology. We've got an A and a B network, which is a spine and a number of leaves. I think we've got 12 leaf switches in total. The spines are Cisco 9508s, and the leaves are Cisco 9236s on the media network. And then we've got equipment either directly connected into them or connected via nodes or IQ frames. Just to give you an idea of the amount of data flying around on here, it's in the region of 4.6 terabits per second going through the spine switches, and it just handles it. And that's crazy when you stop to think about it. When I was at university, I had a 33K modem and thought that was fast, and makes me feel old now. I think how fast we can go without dropping a beat. Most of the networks are running at 100 gigabits per second. We're using single mode MPO optics to join things together. And we've distributed those leaf switches out. So we've actually got distributed video routing. So you simply can't do that with SDI. There's no direct connection between this and our business networks or our control networks. So the interoperability, well, when we set out, we wanted to have about 60% of IO natively connected via IP with 40% via gateways. We recognized we weren't going to be able to move everything to be directly IP, given we were an early adopter. So it was a fairly ambitious target. We didn't quite get there, but we're roughly 50-50. For those of you who've been following British politics, I think the split is pretty much exactly the same as the Brexit vote split. So there's something about that stat in the UK at the minute. It's a sort of a magic number. So about half directly connected. And what's that consist of? Well, we've got the GV Kahuna Vision mixes entirely connected over IP. Sony cameras, we've got them wired for backup via ST as well, but they connect via IP. Not Tektronix anymore, the companies have changed, of course, but the Prism waveform analyzers, they are connected via IP. EVS and Viz engines, Dalet Brio connected directly. Our multi-viewers are integrated. We've got back of monitor connections with embryonics devices, and then our Calrex sound desks are connected in directly onto our IP networks. Everything else goes via gateways. So pretty big achievement there, given that this didn't exist when we set out. Just looking slightly more detail here before moving on, the architecture there. So you can see that we've got the two networks, as I mentioned, and just showing you there for people. We'll make these slides available later so people can look at the details. But yeah, we've got a blend of different connectivity, and it just gives a hint of some of the complexity that I'll talk about in a minute about how we connected the audio. This site is radio as well as TV, and radio on IP behaves differently to TV on IP, and there are different ways of working and different directions of travel from the vendors, which has forced us into some fairly complicated design solutions. Dan, do you want to talk a little bit about the control?
Yes, so I think control methodology, we at the point we bought the live core, I don't think we were quite clear that we would also need a separate and secured control network because of some of the cybersecurity risks that were inherent. We ended up building out a Cisco management and control network for our infrastructure, and the control interface to GV Convergent uses a legacy router protocol, MP17. I think we did start with SWP08, but then there were some issues with the sort of levels that we wanted to manipulate, some of the logical levels of sources and destinations, which meant we could use MP17. I think MP17 started off as Miranda, which was now owned by GV, so that was helpful because if there were any changes needed to that, we could actually use it. Convergent, which now I think the newer version of that is GV Orbit, or the version that's now been meshed together with what was the former SAM Orbit product, controls the network fabric, and that instructs Cisco DCNM to allow certain host and flow policies. So there's no way of plugging. They're not whitelisted switches. You know, anyone who was to just plug any sort of device into any of those switches would not be able to route anything, which did lead to a lot of complicated configuration, which then leads to a longer delivery time. Convergent connects GV edge devices via some GV APIs. So we did want to use NMOS, and I've got the correct IS levels there. So ISO 4 discovery and registration, and ISO 5 connection management. We wanted to use those with all our vendors. What we found when we got to the point of getting vendors in, that it wasn't as mature as some of the trade shows would have led us to believe. And there was a lot more configuration to try and get things to work. And to be fair, I think the standards, they weren't as mature as they are now. So I think it's now reached a far better level of maturity, which should enable more NMOS control. So if you look at the dedicated networks, I mean, I'll look at the big boxes first. So you can see there we've got a monitoring control network, which is where BNCS, Grass Valley Convergent, DCNM all sits on there. It's got its own VM hosting platform. So our BNCS control network, where we used to have sort of single 1U boxes that connected to a control network and then also connected to our main device network. We now have a lot of those drivers sat on a VM platform which talks to an inner firewall. So all the control traffic's routed through a firewall, and if it wants to get anywhere else, generally it has to go out through an outer firewall. We've then got our 2110 live core network just underneath that, which has our amber and blue. So the theory being we could pull the plug on one side of that and either lose the amber or the blue network, and we'd carry on. And we did test that as we tested things like Black Start. We're turning the whole thing off, turning it all back on again to see how quickly it came up. And then we've got our AS67 traffic network, so 8 channels at 1 millisecond. And then we've got our Dante network, which was PTPv1, because we couldn't get at the time, we couldn't get them both on the same network. Everything you can see in the blue is a portion of what in the BBC is called our Wreath network. Generally, it's the office network, but there's also quite a lot of media. There's a media segment of it that has all our sort of post-production tools, some of our TV studio gallery automation all sits on that. And then there's even another little segment of that, which is our playout network. So you can see there's quite, each system has VLANs, and routes between these are all via inner firewalls and external firewalls for security. So I think our original deadline was November 18. We then extended that again, but unfortunately, as we say, even though we had very good support from our systems integrator, we moved some of our testing to their facility. They had various vendors in testing on a representative setup before we moved to site. We kept getting some levels of success, but not the success that we would need to go live in a broadcast center. We continued trying even when we were on site and we were building out at scale, but we still struggled quite a lot with that. So we ended up with, it seemed like there were different approaches from different vendors. So yeah, in the end, we used what was a SAM device, now a GV device, an IQ-UCP gateway, and that allowed us to control routing to and from that turnaround point with some static IP routing, which added a frame of delay. The audio-only receivers, such as our Calric desks, we actually have a pair of GV nodes with no I/O cords fitted, which is a bit strange in the CAA, and they have similarly provided a turnaround point for 2110-30 streams under Grass Valley control.
It's fair to say that when a huge project like this, you have to lock down design decisions, and we locked down in early 2019 when things weren't quite ready for us. I think people coming to the market today will find a much healthier state of play from NMOS. It's working now, and we do have elements of it working, just not as much as we want, which brings me on to the other complex area. PTP, it looks really simple when you look at that diagram. It looks like, well, why wouldn't anyone just draw it out like that and it will just work? And it does. But to get to that elegant, simple solution for PTP, it needed an awful lot of work, an awful lot of head scratching. And PTP is expensive. You need expensive master clocks, and you need to have all the switches being boundary clock PTP aware, and that comes with the price. Now, to an extent, you're already paying for uncompressed video bandwidths. You're paying that sort of price anyway. These are not cheap switches, but PTP is expensive and complicated beast to get working. Fortunately, once you get it working, it does tend to just behave itself. It just works. So that's the redeeming feature. It's hard work to get it underway at first. Once you've cracked it, once you've cracked the architecture and done the switch config, it behaves itself pretty well and has not really been a source of any trouble. You'll be interested to say we're looking at various other projects emerging around the industry, and they all seem to be following a very similar architecture, which I sort of see as our gift to the wider industry. Although when you look at it in detail, you kind of conclude you have to do it that way. So make a note of that architecture. That's the way to get PTP connected into your systems. We had a lot of trouble around audio because we're radio as well as TV in Central Square. we needed to get a whole load of AS67 working, and we also needed to get a whole load of Dante for our post-production working. And those decisions were really driven not by technology, but by workflows. So the workflows within post-production with Pro Tools lend themselves to using Dante equipment. The workflows around radio and the sound desks used for radio lend themselves to using AS67, and we had to get these to work together. So in the end, we've used quite a significant amount of MADI to stitch the various bits of audio domains together. And we've used a pair of GV nodes as special audio gateways to bridge between the 2110 world and the AS67 world. And that gives us a control point as well. One of the things we've had to do for audio is we don't have direct control of what's going in and out of the streams. The streams are static. And then we use the GV nodes as effectively an audio router in the IP domain. So that also allows us to convert from AS67 working at 8 channel 1 millisecond, which is the standard in the radio world, into our Profile C 125 microsecond 16 channel arrangement in the video world. We've also had to encompass a little bit of LiveWire Plus to do some control, and we've managed to get the AS67 and LiveWire Plus into our DERA playout system in the virtual hosting environment. So we've got audio over IP all the way into the hosting environment. That works really seamlessly. The other things we've had to deal with is a lot of the radio environment doesn't have dual presentation. It has copper instead of fiber. So, you know, we had to bridge these worlds together, and it was a lot of head scratching to get it done, but it's working. And the picture you see there is our transmission routing, which is actually MADI and AS3. So we consciously chose not to do the final transmission path over IP, but to have something we could fall back on if we had any issues with the networks. I've mentioned some of this already, but you know, AS67 and 2110-30 are nearly the same, but when you get into the details, there's little frustrations you have to sort out. The profiles, there's so many different profiles, you have to settle on a handful and get them to work, but you know, you have to really think about which ones are going to work for you. Whereas NMOS is now emerging as a standard control platform within the video world, in radio, you've already got LiveWire Plus, you've got Dante, you've got Ember Plus, and you have to bridge those together in some way. And as I said, a lot of audio kit doesn't use the standard 2022-7 resilience model. It's more likely to have teamed ports or other more conventional approaches. When we set out with Dante, we had to use a different PTP profile with version 1 instead of version 2 for Dante. That's now moved on. That's no longer an issue if you're building today. And poor old MADI, which I think everyone was thinking was on the way out, is a really wonderful firewall. So don't ignore it in your designs. So just skimming through the desks we've got connected, we've got a blend of different desks that we had to accommodate for operational reasons. So we've got Calric Artemis in the TV galleries, and they've also got Hydra for their direct I/O. And they connect both to 2110 and to AS67. The radio studios are using DHD series desks, and they're AS67 connected. There's a large drama studio, which is the picture you can see bottom right, that's got a SSL System T desk in it, and that's using Dante, but bridges out to the outside world using AS67. Pretty complicated arrangements to get all that to work. And then we've got our comm system built around Readle, and that's all connected using AS67. So an awful lot of complexity built into what we're doing with audio in this project. Our AS67 network we built using Cisco Nexus switches, but a different flavor of them, a copper-based flavor. So you're bringing the costs down for the audio connections and not carrying audio over very high cost fiber optic switches that we need for video. We had to get PIM working on that. We had to get PTP working with it. We connected it into our virtualization platform, and we've brought it back into the 2110 domain via the IPG 4901 cards in the GV nodes. In the future, we can bring the two together. The networks are designed so we can bring the two together. So we plug in some bridges between the networks and change the control systems. So we've left that way open in the future, but that's not the immediate way of working. And then we've got Dante as well, driven mainly by the need to use Pro Tools. In there, you can see one of our post-production sound rooms. So different ways of working again with Dante. And we've had to use DDM, Dante Domain Manager, to control all of that and bridge that into the AS67 world. So yeah, audio is where an awful lot of the design collateral went in to get things working. So Dan, probably worth talking about how we did some of the testing and what we learned from it.
Yeah, so we learned that it was vital to be doing as much of this as soon as you possibly can. So bringing vendors in as soon as they said they had, and literally it was, I think at stages it was vendors bringing in new versions of firmware for kit to get an interoperability working. That was sometimes happening on a daily or weekly basis. Like I said, we have a supportive systems integrator who allowed us to use their facility for a lot longer than originally envisaged. We did test equipment. At some stage, it was actually quite difficult to get 2110 generators and receivers. So yeah, that was interesting. We were using R&D type PCs that gave us that to start with, and then the market moved on a bit as we were going through testing. We needed to do use a lot of sort of IT techniques, Jira for defect management and TestRail for testing, which obviously we had to agree with vendors. And I'd say the more we did of it, the better we became at it. And it was very easy to go down rabbit holes for quite considerable periods of time before you'd figure out actually there was one bit of configuration or one setting on one bit of kit that could open things up for you. I think overall the lesson learned was it was a very long way away from plug and play, and we did rely very much on our sort of network specialists, both within the BBC, within our systems integrator, within our R&D teams, and also external consultants that we brought in who had experience of doing this. So what went well? Users really enjoyed working in the new radio studios, and I think in the TV studios and galleries, they've enjoyed working in those. To them, not much has changed. Obviously, during testing, there was a lot of nervousness around the new infrastructure, but actually, once that settled down and we resolved the big defects, it's to them, not much has changed. It's just the underlying system and infrastructure that has. 2110 itself works, hasn't really been the thing that's given us major problems. A lot of the problems we had were around control and PTP, I think, in the early days. The audio side of things is a bit more plug and play, I'd say. It's a bit more mature and does tend to work out of the box, although there's still quite a lot of detailed config and architectural thinking needs to be done. Cisco network fabric, it's been pretty rock solid, touch wood. We've not had any problems with using Cisco. Cisco were responsive when we had issues, and our partnership with Grass Valley and Grass Valley's partnership with them definitely helped us in that respect. Our work on the system has allowed us within the BBC to develop a new model for monitoring and control, which is streets away from where we are in other broadcast centres. And finally, the collaboration we had was a partnership with lots of stakeholders, and if it wasn't for that, we would not have got there. So what didn't go as well? Control, as I said, was very difficult. Directly connected IP kit we struggled with, and there's not really many automated techniques for configuring a system of this scale. We were still using spreadsheets at that point. I believe that's probably now changed, but there's a lot of manual configuration needed. And yeah, the audio side of things, as Mark's shown in some of the slides and some of the topology pictures, it's quite a complex solution to what should be straightforward. And yeah, there's still that tendency to say we'll just put it on an unmanaged network from some vendors, which obviously isn't the way we want to go going forward. What helped us on the way? So talked about good support from our key vendors, a lot of testing. The EBU pyramid we contributed to, and I think some of the things that have been spun out of that are directly as a result of what we've achieved in Central Square. So we're obviously very pleased about that, and formalised approach to testing just had to be there, so that when we did find a fault, we knew who to liaise with.
Yeah, it's also worth picking out that the JT&M tested program really helped us sort of see where we were fitting into the wider industry and collaborating in doing something groundbreaking. And yeah, the EBU pyramid, people see this quite a lot, but I think we helped to sort of sprinkle some green into that. Us and a few other key projects pushing this forward sort of have moved on the state of the art. But there's a few things still missing. Orchestration is still difficult. It's improving. I think MWOS is now in a much better place than when we had to lock down our designs, and will really help with that. Workflows are not yet truly embracing all the opportunities. I mean, we all know where we need to get, but we're still building different plumbing into workflows that look like the SDI workflow. But gradually we'll move away from that. the tool sets to do deployments are really, really difficult. There's still far too much dependency on hand typing in SDP files and big Excel spreadsheets, and managing them is hard work. We need to be finding a way of moving, and Andy talked about it in the previous talk, of moving away from the cost and complexity of PTP to something that just looks after itself and is, if not asynchronous, looks like it's asynchronous, so you don't have to worry about it. 2022-7, you know, it just works. You just plug in two networks. Yeah, you pay twice for the networks, but you get the comfort of knowing it will just work, and it's reliable and provably resilient. But then you get the dichotomy between what video vendors are doing, what audio vendors are doing, and you have to sort of bridge the two if you've got both of those domains in your facility. And getting into the cloud is still difficult. It's still expensive, and until we get compression really bedded in and accepted, that's going to be the way of things. So, where's more or less on time. I probably no time for questions unless we move over to the breakout room, but thank you for listening.